Hi, and welcome to Mplus Workshop 5 on Mediation and Moderation in Mplus. This is Janice Cookin. This week we're going to be talking about mediation and moderation. Now, with respect to mediation and moderation, which I will explain shortly, there are many tools out there. For example, Andrew Hayes has something called a process model, which is a macro in SPSS that supports many different types of models. The benefit of this is that it's pretty easy to use. There's a uniformity of options and interpretation of output, and there's some good resources such as the textbook and a website. But the drawback is that you must know the model number you want, and that's not always obvious. You need to only uses OLS regressions, ordinary least squares. It's not as flexible for data abnormalities and can take a long time to run. I tried to run this with a data set with 1 million records, and I waited about 20 minutes and still wasn't finished running, so I kind of gave up on it. Tyler Vanderweel also has macros in StataR and SAS that support use of mediation for direct and indirect effects in causal inference. There's his a link, and he has a great big book on mediation as well. So each of these authors have provided extensive background information and books and materials. So those are both really great. And then there are also thought leaders, as I mentioned, Tyler Vanderweel, of course, Chris Peacher and Andrew Hayes, and Barron and Kenny probably were the first. I'm kind of going backwards here. They published an article on mediation and moderation in 1986 with a technique for measuring the effect of mediation. And that paper has, as of the time that I'm talking to you here on March 30th, over 90,000 citations. So it's quite an article. But each of them take a slightly different approach, and techniques have evolved since Barron and Kenny, and even David Kenny, who is a professor emeritus at University of Connecticut, has published some thoughts in retrospect that identifies that he recognizes that the effect of confounding and actually showing causation are not. It's not enough just to follow his techniques. That you have to set up your research design to support causal inference as well. But considering if you've received data, someone else has already, or you have already done your design and you want to do the analysis, there are many advantages of Mplus. The syntax allows for model definitions that are very flexible. So you're not just limited to the models defined by Hayes. And you can include additional covariates. You can reflect different distribution assumptions of the variables. You can use different estimators. You can handle multi-level data and latent variables. And it is often faster for large or complex data sets. These are the resources I used this week. Of course, stat model I always use. This is a screen print of the textbook by Andrew Hayes. And there's a link here to his website. Here's a link to stats.idre. That's the UCLA website. If I haven't mentioned it before, it's an excellent resource for identifying how to run and interpret models in different contexts and in different softwares. And then this Figure It Out is an interesting website. And it also contains a link, I think, to like an 800-page PDF, which is a bridge between the models and the techniques in Hayes' textbook and using them in Mplus. So it is a terrific resource. This week we're going to be going through these 5 demos. One is mediation with a with a data set called PMI.dat, and the rest of them all use HSB2.dat. So 17 is moderation, 17 plots. It's the same as 17, but it provides some additional syntax to show how you can plot some additional interaction effects, similar to what you can do if you use the Hayes moderation model. Demo 18 shows a simple mediation once again, and demo 19 is a mediated moderation. Now, Andrew Hayes has written a terrific textbook, and I've used it quite a lot. It is called Introduction to Mediation, Moderation, and Conditional Process Analysis. He's also written this really useful macro for SPSS. But if you ever take the time to read this book, it starts with a really nice anecdote. When he was an undergraduate psychology student, his first research was predicting college success using a student's preferred choice of what seat they would sit in the classroom. So he had two measures. One was a survey that measured student attitudes towards whether college was important, and measure two was a chart with seats in a lecture hall, and the students selected where they would sit. Professor Hayes scored these, I should say student Andrew, he scored these high if the student sat in the first row and lower as the selection went back towards the back of the room. His hypothesis was whether students with more positive attitudes preferred sitting closer to the front of the classroom. He did the statistics and he found that yes, there was a significant positive correlation between the two. So he proudly wrote up his results and submitted it for publication. But unfortunately, it was rejected, saying that the paper and the method did not have sufficient rigor to warrant publication. And then he went on and got his PhD. But he kept this paper and he pulls it out from time to time, and here's what he's discovered. First of all, he did not speculate as to why the association existed. So was it their attitudes that predicted what seat they would choose in a lecture hall? Or do they prefer to sit in seats to the front? And when they sit in seats to the front, that actually affects or changes or has a causal impact on their attitudes. So he did nothing to establish the direction. So he had no speculation as to why, and he did nothing to establish the direction of the cause. So did variation affect variation in seat choice, or did variation in seat choice affect attitudes towards college? And how did this variation change across people from different groups with different backgrounds or ability levels? So his life lesson was to attempt to not just describe associations, but also how and when. Mediation and moderation take on this task, and really mostly mediation, but moderation always seems to come along for the ride, because the two are very important when they work together. So mediation, I'll go through quickly an example here. And so X, interested in what effect X has on Y. So X has some direct effect on Y, but we also think that X exerts an effect on an intervening variable, and that intervening variable is M. So X causally changes M. So X affects M, and M causally changes Y. So the effect of X on M, well, actually the effect of X on Y through M is called the indirect effect, and the effect of X on Y through the C prime path is called the direct effect. And the combined effect is called the total effect. And that's actually, you can calculate it here, or you can actually run a regression to calculate it. So if we were just to regress X on Y, let me get that straight, Y on X without M, the result would provide us with the total effect. The decomposition of that total effect of X and Y into the direct and indirect effect is called a mediation analysis, and M is the mediator. All right, in this workshop we're going to talk about a few examples. This is one on perceived media influence. So in this particular example, participants read an article about the effect of an economic crisis that may affect the price and availability of sugar in Israel. Half of the participants were told that article was on the front page. Half of them were told it was in the finance section of the paper, but it was the exact same article. There's no difference in the content. So the question is, does an individual's perceived media influence mediate the effect of the placement of the article on their own reaction to buy sugar or not? So Y is the condition, and that is front page or finance section. M is a measure of their perceived media influence. And Y, the reaction, is their behavior. So do they buy sugar, or they plan to buy sugar? I think it says they plan to buy sugar, or they don't plan to buy sugar, because this was all taken at one time. Data was taken at one time, so they didn't actually follow them to find out if they actually truly bought sugar or not. Yeah, and this could really translate into modern times, right? We could think about the condition of where we get our media and the reaction of whether to buy toilet paper or not in the midst of this coronavirus crisis. Okay, so the next question then is about moderation. So let's talk about moderation. In moderation, you don't have this other variable of a mediator that X works through, but the effect of X changes based on the level of some moderator, M. So for different levels of M, the effect of X on Y is different. You can test whether there is a relationship between X and M, and there should not be one. So in order to complete the regression, you do actually have to create this interaction term. And the interaction term is just the product of X times M. And the equation is right up there. Now we're going to use a data set from the IES called the High School and Beyond data set. It's called HSB2. This is not a complete data set. It's just a sample or from it. It contains test scores for students and also contains student demographic information. So let's say we want to know the effect of the math score on the reading score. So X would be the math score and Y is the reading score. And we want to know if this is moderated by the social studies score. So for different levels of social studies scores, is the effect of the math score different? That's kind of interesting. Maybe you should stop and think about that for a second as you're listening to this. So X is the math score, and M is the social studies score, and X times N is that interaction term, and Y is the reading score. And the question is the effect of math on reading different? So if someone has a really low score in social studies, it's one way, and if someone has a really high score in social studies, it's a different way. And that is shown up in this interaction term. Now with mediation, it's truly a path model because you have to solve equations simultaneously. But with moderation, you really could just create the interaction term and run it in SPSS. But the interpretation is a little more complex, and it's often the case that you'll want to do mediation and moderation together in one analysis. All right, I'm going to move on to the rest of the slides, and we'll get on to running each of these models and a few more in Mplus. This is just a reminder that next week I'm going to release a set of workshop videos for latent variables, and then 2 weeks later a set of workshop videos on the multiple group model analysis. As always, throughout the workshops, if you have questions, please contact me. And since I'm not coming to campus, none of us are. Office hours are available by appointment, not in person. I need to change that, obviously, to just via Zoom. One other thing I want to mention is at the end of the PowerPoint, there are 3 slides. Actually, by the time you get this, I might add another one on. But that's what's there for now, and I will refer to these while we're running Mplus so that you can use them to support your learning of the models. All right, that's all for the introduction video. Now let's run Mplus.